Close your eyes for a moment. What comes to your mind when I ask you to think about a Syrian refugee? What comes to your mind when I ask you to think about an Afghani female refugee? What comes to your mind when I ask you to think about an Iraqi refugee, about Syria, about the Middle East, about Africa? You can open your eyes now. Was it destruction that you saw? Was it people jumping off of boats in the middle of the Mediterranean? Was it bombs dropping from the skies, people fleeing for their lives? Was it terrorists? We are so connected technologically today, but at the same time, the refugee crisis in the Middle East and in the world has been one of the most divisive issues of our time. Half of you might have thought something else, and half of you might have thought completely different. We always think of this demographic in the abstract because of the abundance of multimedia out there. In news channels, that's what we see. We see photos of bombed cities, of people dying, but there seems to be something missing in that story. And our societies have learned through time to label people as though that's what defines us. You're an immigrant, period. You're a refugee, period. One of those labels is my passport. I came here 15 years ago to study architecture in the Midwest. This passport, the Syrian passport, was very prohibitive for me. Before the travel ban as we know it today, there was a different system called NCERS. And 15 years ago, it required 25 nationalities to register with the government every time they changed addresses, every time they moved houses, every time they had to go overseas. And this was well before the Syrian war. The aftermath is I got stuck here 8 years, not being able to be part of my family's life. I grew extremely homesick to a home country that I loved and absolutely longed to. These labels that we hear today, I happen to check the box on a lot of them. I am a Muslim, Arab, Syrian, named Mohamad. And so if I play by the rules of these labels, I can divide my audience 3 or 4 different ways. And it seems there should be a different and a better way to discuss these issues that our globe is witnessing today. I am by full-time job an architect. 6 years ago, I led the design of a 50-story tower in Houston. My career was doing great. I was flying all over, dealing with people. I visually passed. People probably thought I was Italian. But 6 years ago as well, a vicious war had started in my home country, Syria. And I had to cope with that. And so at nighttime, I took to my studio and I remodeled the destruction of Syria in high detail sculptures to cope for this destruction, to cope with the anxiety that I had of witnessing my country being bombed out of existence. For 10 years out of the 15 years, my art was for me and for my eyes only. I did not share it with the world. It was a cathartic expression. It was a therapeutic way for me to cope with homesickness and down the road with the destruction. It's not until in 2014 I received a call while abroad on a business trip. It was my brother-in-law. He said, "Mohamad, I made it to Sweden. I am now a refugee there." You have to understand that the last time I had seen him, it was in his comfortable setting in his successful life as an architect and a businessman in Damascus, Syria. I was so impressed with what he has built that I was this close to joining him. Fast forward 4 years, I see him in a refugee camp. There's a perception out there that immigrants and refugees leave no established lives behind. They have nothing to lose, and they're coming across to take people's wealth and jobs. So I was adamant to use my art for the first time to paint a picture of what drives somebody to put their 2- and 3-year-old in a boat at night in the middle of the Mediterranean, knowing that 50% chance that boat is capsizing. How desperate do you have to be to get to that point? And so, in a divided society about refugees, immigrants, how do you talk with your mouth shut? My art gave me the ability to draw these bridges between people. And so, I took that art to test. I stopped talking about my personal lives, and I started discussing how it feels for many refugees. And I established Unpacked Refugee Baggage with my good friend Ahmed Badr. And we interviewed 10 refugee families from all walks of life, all backgrounds, different religions. We sat with them over a lot of coffee and baklava for hours, learning from them their stories, learning from them what they left behind. And I went back to studio, and I started modeling in high fidelity these high details sculptures that I had. What it must have felt for somebody to leave their home right on the spot. And so people came out of everywhere when they heard about the talk, when they heard about the project, when they heard about this art project. People from all over the world in America, from different backgrounds, Jewish, Irish, Catholic, Indian, Latino, donated to me their parents' and grandparents' suitcases to tell the stories of today's migrants, because they recognized history tends to repeat itself. We shouldn't allow history to repeat its mistakes. So what you see in these sculptures is what people's lives were like right before the bomb has fell. The reading that we've gotten in our exhibits, when I saw some of the facial expressions on people, I realized this is a way to talk about a story, to talk about a pain of a civilization in ways the news channels were not catering to the world. And so we designed 10 refugee cases with their stories modeled inside them. At a first glance, you see a headset, you put it on, and it was them talking to you one-on-one. They were telling you their stories. In English, it was just you and them describing their lives. And while a lot of their lives started with a hardship, it started with war, it was not the entire definition of their existence. What if you thought of an Afghani female refugee as somebody that empowered 300 students in an underground secret school in Iran simply because they weren't allowed to attend school because of their undocumented status? That's Farishte. Farishte is an Afghani refugee today, attending nursing school and teaching at a local university here. Her husband started working minimum wage hours and continued his engineering degree. What if you, instead of thinking of war and destruction for the Iraqi refugee, you saw an amazing, talented photographer named Maher. You saw an amazing artist that built himself from ground up, lived in New York City, and now works for Google. What if instead of a Syrian refugee, you did not picture a bombed out house, but you saw a family that left their breakfast very quickly before the army blasted their village? That family thought they would be back in 6 days after things have calmed down. Well, for Ghina, it has been 6 years since she's been back to her house. But that doesn't define her. That's not the end of the story. Ghina is the daughter of a fantastic chef that just opened up his restaurant in Connecticut. She is a bright young scientist now attending on full scholarship a private academy in the United States. You see, we all go through hardships. Who doesn't have baggage? We all can relate to living out of our suitcases, to carrying our emotions, to having rough times in our past. It doesn't define us. That's just part of the story. The rest of the story is who we are today. My brother-in-law, the Syrian refugee in Sweden, happens to be one of the few architects in his region. He is in high demand. He just finished up his first architectural project, established his architectural firm, bought a house, and is now contributing to the host society that warmly welcomed him. If you're going to take one thing out of my talk today, here it is. We all fear the unknown. That's a human thing, really. We always have our comfortable circles and bubbles. If I can invite you to leave your circle for one split second and invest in true conversation with somebody you thought you'd never meet or talk to or even have coffee with, I assure you, you would be up for a pleasant surprise. And perhaps when our world learns to think about these labels and the humans that are behind these labels, that we would not see a day and age where we have a travel ban that paints millions of people with one wide brushstroke. That we would come to a day that a Muslim woman does not fear walking the streets in her hijab just because of how she looks. That we come to a day that we realize the common denominator that connects us all is rather and vastly bigger than the nitty-gritty differences they tell us we should care about. All it takes is a cup of coffee and a suitcase. Thank you very much.